From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. One of the most closely watched and consequential races nationally is happening right here in our region. The results of the race could determine control of the House of Representatives, where Republicans currently hold a narrow majority. And both parties are pouring millions of dollars into the race. It's the congressional race in Southwest Washington's District 3 between freshman Democratic Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and Republican challenger Joe Kent. It's a rematch from 2022 and one of the true toss-up races in the nation. Representative Perez won the race in the Republican-leaning district by just 2,629 votes. And Republicans think they have a good chance of reclaiming the seat that was held by former GOP Congresswoman Jaime Herrera Beutler until 2 years ago. Gluesenkamp Perez is one of only 5 House Democrats who represent districts former President Trump won in 2016 and 2020. Gluesenkamp Perez is a 5th-generation Washingtonian, a small business owner. She and her husband Dean co-own a car repair shop in Portland. She's 36 years old and earned her economics degree at Reed College. She and her husband and young son live in Skamania County. Joe Kent is 44 years old, a retired 20-year veteran of U.S. Special Forces. Following his military service, he was a field operative in the CIA and a foreign policy advisor to former President Trump and has received Trump's endorsement for a second time. Kent is a Gold Star husband. His first wife was killed in Syria fighting ISIS. He remarried last year, and he and his wife Heather and 2 young sons live in Yakult, Washington. Welcome to my guests, Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and Joe Kent. Welcome back to Straight Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to let our viewers know that we've decided, everyone's agreed to use first names for the purpose of this show. And we're going to do a bonus episode because there's so much to get to, and we don't have a lot of time here on Straight Talk, so they can find that on KGW Plus and on KGW's YouTube channel. So we'll get right to the issues. We do have a timekeeper off to the side here. Ashley, our fantastic producer, will try to keep us on time. So let's jump right in. People in your district, like Americans across the country, are concerned about the cost of living. And the Democratic administration is getting a lot of blame for inflation. It has come down quite a bit, but people are still struggling. What is the number one thing you think you can do in your district to improve the lives of people and help make things more affordable here at home? We'll start with Marie.
Yeah, I mean, people are putting their groceries on a credit card, and it kills me to see that. People are working 3 jobs and still not making rent. And, you know, I really believe that we have got to make this economy work for working people again. I'm really proud of the work I've done to support the critical skills like shop class, where we learn how to own and build homes. There are so many avenues to build wealth in the middle class, and it feels like a lot of my colleagues don't understand how urgent the situation is, and they don't exercise all of the tools that we have as a nation of people who make and build things. So leveling up the playing field for small businesses like mine, bringing down the cost of groceries, and, you know, supporting a level playing field for small businesses.
And Joe, what would you do to make things more affordable here at home?
So look, the number one driver of this inflation is out of control spending in Washington, D.C. Now, unfortunately, my opponent has authorized $4 trillion in new spending. D.C. is addicted to printing money, and that's what people in their regular lives can't do. Families just simply can't print money. They actually have to live within a budget. So Washington, D.C. has to stop this money printing. We take in around $5 trillion in tax income. We can't spend $7.5 trillion, which is what this current administration wants to do. So we actually have to do individual appropriations bills, put a real cap on spending, get back to being energy independent. That's going to take down the price at the pump. That's going to take down the price of groceries and the things that people consume on a daily basis. And then we've got to grow the economy. We can't tax our way out of this, and we can't spend our way out of this. We have to support deregulation for small businesses, deregulation for the timber industry and the fishing industry. And unfortunately, Democrats have supported excessive government regulations and are continuing to do so. So balancing the budget, energy independence, and ensuring that we deregulate and make a business-friendly, worker-friendly environment.
The cost of living also concerns retirees or people getting close to retiring, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that because I got this mailer I live in your district. I got this mailer that says "Don't count on you, Joe Kent," when we talk about Social Security. So I want to explore that with you because according to the Social Security Administration, the trust fund revenues will be depleted by 2035, and then retirees would only get 83% of their benefits if Congress doesn't take action. So Joe, you and I actually talked about this a couple of years ago, and you said you favored a blended option for younger workers, people closer to your age, that included the option of a private 401k type of plan and raising the retirement age. You didn't say exactly to what, but you said closer to 70. Do you still support a plan like that?
Nothing's going to bankrupt Social Security faster than the way Washington, D.C. is spending money right now. So first and foremost, we have to get our financial house in order, put Washington, D.C. on a actual diet of what they take in federal tax revenue, ensure that we pay the Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits up front. We owe that to the people who've already put into this. And then look, I do think we have to have a broader national conversation on what we're going to do in the long run with Social Security for people who are my age and younger. But for the folks that are on Social Security right now, we have to ensure fiscal responsibility to ensure that Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, veterans benefits stays solvent. The trajectory that we're on right now, I think making it to 2035, I feel like that's actually pretty ambitious.
So you wouldn't do anything, take any congressional action to try to make sure it doesn't get depleted?
The first action we have to do is get back onto a course where we're actually being financially responsible. We have to stop the out-of-control money printing and live within our means, make sure that Congress is not passing omnibus bills and continuing resolutions.
Not to pass omnibus bills might take requiring changing the filibuster, but that's a whole nother question. Marie, do you support congressional action to make sure that retirees can get their full benefits after 2035, and what would you do?
Well, I just want to be clear that Joe's plan is actually to privatize Social Security. That's what he's arguing for. He's argued repeatedly to increase the age of retirement. He says that people are living longer. Some white-collar people are in those jobs, but not in the trades where I work. And neither of us like it when the federal government prints money to spend on dumb stuff. But I have a record that's very clear voting for the Bipartisan Fiscal Responsibility Act that mandated spending caps. I introduced a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget. My record's really clear. I would never run the federal government the way that we run our business's budget, and my record reflects that.
Do you have a quick response to that?
Yeah, that sounds nice, but she voted for $4 trillion in new spending and no cap on spending. You can go to mariewatch.com to actually see what her actual voting record is.
Did you vote for that?
That's not true. He's going after a vote on the Limit, Save, Grow Act, which is really funny because it would have slashed veterans' expenditures. I have a real urgent accountability to our veterans to ensure that they have the resources they need. The bill that he wanted me to vote for would have slashed the VA. I can't get behind that. I got a better deal by holding out for the Fiscal Responsibility
Act. Let's move on to another.
So she actually voted to defund the VA when House Republicans took out transgender surgeries. Again, go to mariewatch.com. There's links to her House.gov voting record where you can see exactly how she voted. Look, if the Democrats were wanting to put our financial house in order, they would have done it 2 years ago. They would have done it 4 years ago.
Okay, Joe, Marie, let's move on because we don't have a lot of time here on Straight Talk. So, Joe, you told us here on Straight Talk in 2022, you believe life begins at conception. You also told me that you support a national ban on abortion. You also said that you thought Washington state's laws protecting abortion rights should be overturned, and the Supreme Court's decision to turn the issue over to the states was a good temporary victory, you said. Well, now you're saying you wouldn't vote for a national abortion ban. So it's a pretty big shift since 2 years ago when we talked. Why the change? Why the change of heart?
I support the Supreme Court's decision to put the issue of abortion back in the states. Part of being a leader is getting out and talking to people. And look, abortion is a very divisive issue. There's a lot of folks who are pro-life. There's a lot of folks who are pro-choice. Washington state is still a very pro-choice state. So getting out and talking to people, I realize that people don't share my exact view. I think the Supreme Court saying that, hey, this is a divisive issue. We're going to take it out of the federal government's purview. We're going to put it back down at the states. I think that's actually the right call. And technically, according to the law, that is 100% the law now.
So you changed your mind after talking to your constituents.
Yeah, most
certainly. Let me just ask you, because there is a real possibility that the Republicans could run the table. They could be the majority in the House, the Senate, and in the White House. So will you make a pledge to viewers, to voters right now, that you would, if you're elected to Congress, you would never vote for a national abortion ban?
Yeah, I'll never support a national abortion ban. I support the Supreme Court's decision to put the issue of abortion abortion back down at the state level. Look, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution for 20 years. My word is my bond. I really want to protect the sanctity of our laws and ensure that our system is upheld. I believe in the Supreme Court's decision. So, look, we're going to talk a lot about protecting women, but I think when it comes to protecting women, my opponent has displayed through her vote by voting to allow men into the women's locker room.
Okay, we're going to get to that.
We're going to get to that, but that's about protecting women too, so that's pretty important.
We're going to talk about that in the bonus round, so stay tuned for that. But I want to ask Marie about abortion. A Pew Research poll shows most Americans think there should be some restrictions on abortion, and that more than half said stage of pregnancy should be a factor in determining the legality of abortion. Do you favor any restrictions on abortion?
So when I ran for this office, I had an 8-month-old, so it was really front of mind for me how quickly things can go wrong and how drastically wrong they can go. There is not going to be a federal law that encompasses all of the complexity, placenta previa, preeclampsia, things these staffers bros writing the bills have never heard of. But I'd like to return because Joe is actually on tape saying he supports a constitutional amendment for an abortion ban. You're on tape after Dobbs' decision saying that you support a national ban on abortion.
But you're saying you changed your mind,
and that your word is your bond. But like your word goes with the pollster. It was after. It's on. You're on tape after, dude.
Look, I support the Supreme Court's decision to put it back at the states.
So let me ask you, Marie, why did you vote with Republicans, one of only 6 Democrats, on the National Defense Authorization Act that limited abortion access for military service members?
National defense is really important to people in my community. And it is a huge red flag to all of our foreign adversaries to say that we're not going to fund our military. I support our folks in uniform, and they needed that pay raise. That's the reality.
So you needed to vote for restricting abortion rights for military service members, you're saying, in order to support the military.
Supporting the military is really important, and I voted against each one of those amendments that would have restricted abortion, throwing all of these like clickbait politics into it. I voted against every one of those toxic amendments. And we'll see, and it's clear now, like those amendments were not passed into law through the Senate. We got the bill that we needed out of that, and we supported our military. That's what.
Okay, let me move on to foreign policy. Marie, you've supported the U.S. supplying weapons to Israel. The progressives in your party are not happy with your support for Israel, and now the U.S. is sending Israel its THAAD missile defense system to protect Israel from further attacks from Iran, and that includes 100 U.S. troops, putting American service members closer to a widening war in the Middle East. Do you support this latest move?
I think one thing that we need to be clear here, we just passed the 1-year anniversary of the October 7th attack. That was the deadliest day for Jewish people since the Holocaust. The fastest way for this war to end is for Hamas to release the hostages. That's what my neighbors believe, that's what I believe, and that's why I voted. Every vote I take is centered on our national interest, our community's interest.
Do you support this latest move to supply the THAAD missile defense system along with 100 U.S. troops?
I think that it's critical that we support the only liberal democracy in the Middle East and ensure that our reputation is upheld. As somebody who stands by their word, stands by our allies, that is our national interest.
Would you support any limits to U.S. support for Israel?
I don't think we need. I think Israel needs the right to defend themselves, and I voted consistently on that. I support Israel's right to defend their borders against terrorists.
Let me ask you, Joe, during a town hall meeting, you said that we're on the cusp of World War III, but the only war you think the U.S. should be fighting is at the U.S. southern border. So with that in mind, what do you think about Israel and the question of Israel? Do you support the U.S. providing any weapons, military support to Israel?
Certainly, yeah. Israel has the right to defend itself, and it's, I think, our responsibility to ensure they have the resources that they need. Right after the October 7th attacks, House Republicans put forward a bill that would have given Israel immediate support, except for Marie and the rest of her Democrat colleagues voted against supporting Israel right after October 7th, when Hamas was still holding American citizens hostage, because they wanted to use the crisis in Israel as a bargaining chip to negotiate a greater foreign aid package of all new inflationary spending to get $60 billion printed to go to Ukraine.
What about the THAAD missile defense system?
That is a terrible idea. U.S. boots should not be on the ground inside Israel. The THAAD missile system can be operated from Jordan, where our troops aren't under direct attack, or it can be operated offshore in the Mediterranean. Putting boots on the ground, that is essentially an act of war, because what happens when an Iranian ballistic missile hits hits them or when one of the proxy groups hits them. Then next thing you know, we're at war that no one voted for. It's Congress's job to ensure that there's a check on the executive branch, regardless of who's in power, to ensure that our troops aren't blindly led off to war as we had for the previous 20 years.
Well, let me ask you about Ukraine, because you've said you don't favor the U.S. support in Ukraine in its fight against Russia's invasion. Do you want Ukraine to win that war?
I want the killing to stop. Right now, we are on the cusp of World War III on multiple fronts. We have already crossed Joe Biden's stated red line. At the beginning of the conflict, President Biden himself stated if we provided the Ukrainians with long-range U.S. missiles that would be shot into Russia, that would be World War III. Well, because Congress hasn't put any guardrails and actually done their job on this march to war, now we have U.S. missiles that are being shot into Russia. We have joint Russian and Chinese patrols that are taking place off the coast of Alaska. This is as close as we've been to nuclear war, really, since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And really, the stated...
Well, how does the fighting end? You said you want the killing to end. How does that happen?
We get both sides to the negotiating table.
And will that include...
2 years ago, when we first started talking about this, I said, hey, we shouldn't be involved in this fight. And I was called everything from a Putin supporter, to being anti-American. But for the last 2 years, we have pursued this strategy that says we'll give the Ukrainians unlimited weapons. And look where we are. We've had a generation of Ukrainians that have been killed, and Russia now controls more ground inside of Ukraine than did at the beginning of the war. By any measurement, the current strategy...
Let me let Marie jump in here.
We're not the ones calling you a Putin supporter. You're the one calling Putin a reasonable guy. You called Zelensky a thug.
What's the strategy then? We've done your strategy now for 2 years.
The strategy is to not hand the keys to continental Europe to Putin.
Marie, how does
Ukraine has the right to defend themselves.
You're going to keep listening to the same defense contractors, and you're going to keep listening
to my community. Our Ukrainian
brass that
you're yelling at me.
Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq.
Our Ukrainian community here in Southwest Washington is personally hurt by this. First, Joe quoted Russian state media. Now they're quoting him. He is making the exact same arguments that our adversaries are. That's the reality.
So, Marie, just real quick before we go to break, how do you see this conflict ending?
Ukraine has to have the resources to stop a dictatorial march.
Limit to what you think the U.S. should supply to Ukraine?
Putin does not have a limit.
You don't support
He's going into Georgia. He's going into Moldova. This will take over continental Europe. Is that going to keep us safe? It won't.
At the beginning of the war, Putin showed that Russia doesn't have the capability to expand further than they do right now. Putin failed to conduct an armored column movement from his border into Kiev. They failed at that.
Joe, I have to stop you there. Thank you so much. We'll continue our conversation with the candidates for Congress. In Southwest Washington's 3rd District, Joe Kent and Representative Gluesenkamp Perez. We're back after the break. Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. We're talking with the candidates in the hotly contested congressional race in Southwest Washington District 3 between Democrat Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and Republican Joe Kent. Thank you both again for being here. The I-5 bridge, that has been controversial since I've lived here for more than 20 years. I drive it all the time. It's a mess. So let's talk about that. You both have different opinions, so we'll get into that. The Interstate Bridge Replacement Project is moving forward. You both have very different opinions about it. Marie, you brought Transportation Secretary Buttigieg here to take a look at it. You've helped get federal funding, and it seems to be moving forward. It's designed to have light rail and tolls, something a lot of Southwest Washington residents don't like, including the previous Congresswoman Jamie Herrera Butler opposed light rail and tolls. Why do you support this plan that includes that?
My role is to bring back our federal tax dollars and to make sure that the local and state legislators who are making this decision are listening to a representative sample of our community and not just folks who have the luxury of going to the public hearing. Tolls are a regressive tax. And I have to fight for my constituents. I hear them asking, what am I supposed to say? Like when they're sitting on a bridge or I'm sitting there missing my kid's doctor's appointment, sitting in traffic, and light rail goes past with 4 people on it. It's critical that we build infrastructure for the uses today. In rural Skamania County where I live, 80% of employed people are employed outside of the county. We don't have the luxury of taking a bus to work.
What are you going to do about tolls, though? Because everything I read and I hear is tolls are kind of a done deal with this bridge project. And in fact, they're talking about starting tolls in 2026 before the bridge is even done. How do you stop that?
Tolls are a regressive tax. And the thing that I have to urge everyone to do right now is to make a public comment. You don't have to go to the in-person meetings, but get online, make a public comment. comment, make sure they're hearing you, because somebody else will be talking for you. And it's so critical that if another state wants to have these bells and whistles, they need to be the one that pays for it, not us. Our users need to be reflected.
Let me ask you, Joe,
in the
you
design.
support a third bridge idea, and the head of the IBR project says he's not necessarily against that, but that the interstate bridge replacement project has to come first, and then there's a problem of funding. It's taken us 20 years to get to this point, and we still don't have a new bridge. The Columbia River crossing was scrapped in 2013 or 14, and we're still working on it. What makes you think, and how, as a freshman congressman, do you think that you can get funding and get a third bridge built in our lifetimes?
Look, I think it's absolutely essential because the current plan right now is to replace a 3-lane bridge with a 3-lane bridge that does nothing to address the congestion. So we're still going to have all the congestion, but we're going to spend the money. What we need to do is we need to have Washington, D.C. actually focus on federal infrastructure. And this is a very clear-cut federal nexus connecting two states. I-5 does commerce for the entire West Coast. So this is a place where we need the federal government to step up, take a leading role, use federal funding to provide a third bridge. That's very, very possible when we stop prioritizing sending billions of dollars or an unlimited amount of money, as we just heard from her, over to Ukraine. My premise is very simple. We need to prioritize our own country and worry about other countries later.
You think you'd be able to have an influence and get that done?
Absolutely. There's a lot of people in the Republican caucus right now who are very skeptical of the amount of foreign aid we're sending overseas, and they are very dedicated to finally once and for all putting our country first. And the government, the federal government, actually doing real infrastructure projects, that's something that's absolutely critical. And I think President Trump has a very good chance of winning the presidency, and we're going to need someone in Congress who can work directly with the White House to make sure that we actually get a third bridge. And we're not spending billions of dollars to replace a 3-lane bridge with a 3-lane bridge that gets us light rail and tolls.
You mentioned President Trump. He's endorsed you now twice. And you told me last time you were on Straight Talk that you didn't think he lost the 2020 election. You said it was rigged and stolen. Do you still believe that?
I think lots of people still have questions about the election, but that's not my focus at all in this current environment that we're in. When I get out and I talk to people, they're worried about the out-of-control inflation. They can barely afford gas. They can barely afford groceries.
So will you accept the outcome of this election locally and nationally, no matter what the results are?
I accepted the result of the last election. I lost by less than a percentage point and then conceded to her and then kicked the campaign back off again. I fought for our country. I fought for our system. I believe in our system with all my heart. I think these issues from a few cycles ago, I just don't think they're on the forefront of people's minds right now. It's the inflation. It's the wide open southern border, which I hope we're going to get to talk about.
We're going to talk about that in the bonus episode. But the president has said that if he wins, that he would go after his political adversaries. And he's even talking about using the military to do that. Do you support that?
I think his remarks were taken drastically out of context. When the country was burning in 2020, there was a lot of people within the Republican Party that were encouraging President Trump to use the military on the population. He didn't do that. So he was a president already for 4 years. He didn't overstep the Constitution and turn the military on people.
So you don't think he'll go after his political adversaries?
I don't think he will. I won't do that. I wouldn't be a part of that. I don't think him and J.D. Vance would do that at all. What we're going to be focused on is getting inflation under control.
That's wild.
I got to ask Marie a question, a really important question, though. Marie, you're a Democrat. The top of your ticket is Kamala Harris. As far as I know, you have not endorsed Kamala Harris. Will you endorse her now?
No.
Why not?
No. It is not my job to tell people how to vote.
But you won't endorse her. Will you vote for her? Will you vote for Kamala Harris?
People that I
Marie,
love.
I need to ask. Will you vote for Kamala Harris?
I know what my values are, and I know a lot of people who I respect who are doing both, voting for either candidate. And it is really critical.
For President Trump?
I'm not voting for Trump.
So you'll vote for Kamala Harris or not vote at all?
I've been really clear on this. I'm going to vote, but it's not the role of a federally elected member to tell people how to vote. Okay, I know what my values are, and I know what my community's values are.
I got to stop you there. I want to give you each 30 seconds for a final thought to share with voters. We'll start with Marie.
I really want to go back to D.C. to continue to fight for the urgent work of securing our southern border, supporting law enforcement, ensuring that our small businesses have a level playing field and there's real competition to bring down the cost of groceries, build more starter homes, fight the young, a lot of young farmers have not been able to buy farmland because of Chinese investors. We have got to have our perspective in D.C., not D.C. politics inserting themselves into our world here.
Joe, 30 seconds.
So look, we have a lot of real crises that we're facing right now. People can barely afford to put food on the table or fill up the gas tank. That's due to out of control spending in Washington, D.C. that my opponent has voted for. We also have a wide open southern border. She just talked about it, but one of the first votes that she took in Congress was to leave the border wide open. And now we have a massive fentanyl epidemic that's killing real people in our district. She's attempting to sound like a moderate, but she's voted in lockstep with her party to include putting men into your daughter's dressing room. You can read all about her voting record at mariewatch.com. I'd be honored to serve you in Washington, D.C.
Joe Marie, thank you for joining us. We're going to continue our conversation with the candidates in a bonus episode, including talking about immigration. And you can find that on KGW's YouTube channel and on KGW Plus. Join us next week when we focus on another local congressional race in the national spotlight in Oregon's 5th Congressional District, the race between freshman Congresswoman Lori Chavez Dreamer and Democrat Janelle Bynum. We'll see you next week for Straight Talk.